In our everyday lives, it's easy for us to identify whether something is living or non-living. For example, if we go on a walk and we see our neighbor, we see a tree, we see a dog, we understand that these are all living organisms. And then we may see some concrete, the rocks, the sand, and we're going to say, okay, those are non-living. We understand what is living and non-living, but how do we truly define what is living and non-living through biology? That is where we get these 7 characteristics, and these 7 characteristics are attributed to defining living organisms. And in order for something to be living, it must exhibit the majority of these 7 characteristics. Now we'll go through these 7 characteristics and we will compare each characteristic with a dog in a vacuum to truly understand how we define something as living or non-living. Now here we say the first characteristic is that living organisms will maintain homeostasis. Now let's say that there's a really sunny day, it's 30 degrees out, and it's just really hot. What's the dog gonna do? Well, the dog is gonna start sticking its tongue out because that's a cooling mechanism for dogs. If it was a human, we would start perspiring and sweating. We would want to drink water because we want to get back to our regular body temperature, right? So in a way, that is maintaining homeostasis. So a dog is able to maintain its homeostasis on a hot day or a cold day. It might shiver on a cold day, right? Because shivering is a mechanism to warm you up. But what about this vacuum? Can a vacuum maintain homeostasis? I don't think so, right? On a hot day, the vacuum isn't going to start sweating. It's not going to want a cold glass of water, right? So in this case, we say that the vacuum this characteristic does not apply to a vacuum, but it does for the dog. The second characteristic is that living things must reproduce. Well, can a dog reproduce? Yes, it can. Just like a human or a dolphin or any other type of organism, a dog is able to reproduce. It's able to have offspring. Can a vacuum reproduce? Can it produce other vacuums? I know we would all love that, right? Because then we wouldn't have to go buy vacuums if the one vacuum we bought could just reproduce. Well, no, right? Vacuums cannot reproduce, but a dog can, right? Third characteristic is that living things must exhibit growth and development. Can a dog grow and develop? Of course. We start off with a baby dog, and over time it'll grow, it'll mature, it might get hairier, it might get larger, it'll gain the ability to run faster maybe. But what about a vacuum? Can a vacuum grow and develop? Not really. A vacuum does not grow and develop. It does not exhibit that characteristic. What about living things must utilize energy acquired from the environment, or they self-synthesize the energy? When we talk about self-synthesize the energy, that can be plants, remember? But when we talk about utilizing energy from the environment, that could be consuming food, right? Well, a dog does consume food, and it uses the energy within that food, right? What about a vacuum? A vacuum, one could argue that the vacuum does acquire energy from the environment because we plug it into an outlet and the electricity is a form of energy for the vacuum. But realistically, this does not apply to the vacuum because we are talking about acquiring energy, converting it and into the form of ATP and then utilizing that to carry out functions. The fifth characteristic is that living things must adapt to the environment. For example, you may exhibit habituation, you might adapt to a climate or a specific area you are living in, certain food resources. So living things must be able to adapt to what their environment provides, right? Whereas a vacuum, it's not really going to adapt to its environment. It doesn't need to do much, right? It just sits in the closet. Number 6, living things must respond to stimuli. For example, if you pinch yourself right now, you're going to respond with a jolt, right? Because you're responding to a stimuli. Same with a dog. A dog is going to respond to physical stimuli, visual stimuli, sound stimuli, right? Whereas a vacuum, if you go punch a vacuum, it's not going to respond to that stimuli, right? It's just going to stay there laying on the ground. So this does not apply to a vacuum either. The last one is that living things will exhibit a high degree of organization. So what does that mean? Well, if we take a look at a cell is composed of many organelles, right? First of all, we have that nucleus, which encloses our DNA in the form of chromosomes with the histone proteins. We have the endoplasmic reticulum, the lysosomes. You have the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, the peroxisomes, the Golgi body. So much is going on within a cell. So that's a high degree of organization. And then those cells can actually form tissues. The tissues can form organs. The organs can form organ systems. So you get that high degree of organization. So the dog exhibits that high degree of organization, right? We could actually say that a vacuum also exhibits a high degree of organization because it's highly put together in a specific way, and it only works in that specific way. If you take apart one of these components, it's not going to work, right? It exhibits that organization. So this characteristic, we could say, could apply to a vacuum. But overall, we noticed that the vacuum did not have many of the characteristics that are used in biology to define if something is living, but the dog had all of those characteristics. So therefore, we would say that a dog is living and a vacuum is non-living. And those are the 7 characteristics we utilize in biology to define living versus non-living.